Welcome to part 1 of the Emotional Fitness series. This week, we are covering foundations. What is emotional fitness? How can you train your inner voice? And building emotional awareness. These are the 3 topics that we are going to cover in the foundations section of this series, okay? These are great topics and a great start to you understanding your emotional well-being and some steps that you can take to help improve it today. You don't want to miss this. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Mindset Gym podcast, where we exercise your way of thinking to help unlock your hidden potential. I'm your host, Emily Irwin, a registered nurse and holistic nutritionist with a passion for all things health, fitness, and personal development. All right, let's get into it. Hi guys, welcome back to the Mindset Gym podcast. I am so excited for this episode. I was so psyched putting together this kind of series. We've never done a series before on the podcast, and I thought this would be kind of a really fun way to switch up the formatting of my episodes a little bit and connect a few episodes together into a really cohesive lesson that you guys can take away and implement into your own lives. We're going to be covering a vast array of topics over the next 5 weeks, and I'm going to be giving you guys really tangible strategies to help implement all of the things that we're talking about. So let's get into foundations. The first topic that we are going to be talking about today is emotional fitness, which is the title of this entire series, and it may or may not be a term that you've heard before. But we're going to get into what exactly emotional fitness means. And essentially, the bare bones of this is that emotional fitness is something that you can train. And that is going to kind of be the overarching theme of this entire series, is that so many aspects of your mental well-being and your emotional well-being are things that you have the ability to train. It's not something you're born with. It's not something that you either have or you don't. You have the ability to take steps to improve your mental well-being. And it's something that takes continuous practice and continuous work and continuous progression, similar to you doing any sort of physical fitness endeavor in the gym. And so this is kind of how we're tying this all together under the Mindset Gym. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I got a really big kick out of all the names of this entire series. Anyways, before I ramble on too much about that, let's get into emotional fitness. A quote that I want to kick this off with and kind of dive into that I think describes this really well is something that Sage Robbins said on a podcast with her husband, Tony Robbins. And she said that mental well-being is something we claim for ourselves. And this is such a beautiful way of phrasing this, is that you have the power to claim mental well-being. Just because it feels like you may not have it right now doesn't mean that it's not something you can't cultivate and work towards. You have the power to claim that for yourself. It is something that is practiced and built over time. And so instead of learning how to control certain weights in the gym or how to control your own body weight, you are instead learning how to control your emotions and your thoughts. Now, this doesn't mean that life is going to be easy and life is going to be stress-free. That's just not the way that it works. But you building emotional fitness and you building emotional resilience and practicing these skills will make you much better equipped to handle life's challenges. When those stressful moments come along, how do you handle it? Do you get stuck ruminating in the terrible thing and let it kind of stop your progress and hold you back from building a future that you want? Or do you move through it in a really productive way? Your amount of emotional fitness going into something stressful or challenging is going to determine your ability to take that challenge on and move through it instead of just getting stuck marinating in it. And I want to make the distinction between emotional fitness and emotional intelligence. So Tony Robbins broke this down actually in a way that I really liked, and he kind of differentiated between the two. And he described emotional intelligence as a resource. It's a resource of knowledge. It's something that you can tap into when you need it. And you can be really smart objectively. You can know all of the things. You can have all of the research. But emotional fitness differs in a little bit of a way. And Tony Robbins describes it as a state of readiness. Whereas you don't just have the information. You don't just have the objective knowledge of things. You've actually put it into practice and built this skill so that when something challenging comes along, you're ready. you are prepared to take it on. And so emotional fitness in its simplest form mimics physical fitness in so many ways. There are so many parallels between the two. How do you handle stress? How do you balance in unfamiliar territory? How do you operate day to day? How resilient are you? How adaptable are you? All of these things that can be applied to our physical fitness can also be applied to our emotional fitness. It is your ability to take on challenge quickly without getting stuck in it. So something we can do to start working on our emotional fitness is not just obtaining the knowledge, not just learning all the things about it, but actually putting them into practice. Actually implementing the things that you learn that are going to help improve your mental well-being. Several of these things are topics that we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks. And I don't want you to just take the information and, write it down and have that be that. This is going to be... I'm going to say something similar to what Mel Robbins says. She always says that her podcast is a doing podcast. This, my friends, is a doing series. I don't want you to just learn this information and store it somewhere and call it a day. I want you to put these tools into practice. I want you to actually implement these things. Start working to strengthen that muscle of emotional fitness so that when challenges come your way, which they inevitably will, you are ready to take them on. I'm going to give you another quote from Dr. Emily Anhalt that she said in a conversation about emotional fitness. And she said something that I really love that kind of perfectly encapsulates the notion of putting these things into practice and working on them ahead of time in order to build that fitness and build that resilience before you actually need it. And she said that waiting until you have a mental health crisis to seek mental health support is like waiting until you have heart disease to start doing cardio. So do you see how it seems counterintuitive when we put it in terms of our physical fitness? You waiting until there is a problem with your physical health to actually take any steps to improve it, you're already so far behind the 8 ball when you do that. It is so much harder to make impactful change when a crisis has already happened. Whereas you're going to be much better off if you start taking those steps to improve your physical fitness, doing the cardio, eating the healthy foods, getting regular exercise, taking care of your mental well-being, all of these things. If you put the work in ahead of time, not only are you better equipped to manage a crisis when it happens, but the chances of there being a crisis in the first place are much lower. So don't wait until your mental health is in crisis to start taking steps to improve it. Don't wait until it feels like you are at your breaking point to go to therapy. You can do all of these things now. You can do them when you are in kind of a mentally okay place and use them as a tool to build your fitness going forward. Dr. Emily Anhart said something else on this topic, and she said to treat your mental health like going to the gym, not like going to the doctor, which again, I love that kind of comparison. Don't treat it as something that you need to address only when things go wrong. Treat it like going to the gym, where it is a regular practice. It is something that you are continuously working to improve, not something that you were trying to scramble to fix once shit has kind of already hit the fan. Now, Dr. Emily Anhalt has actually done quite a bit of work under this particular topic. So Dr. Anhalt is a clinical psychologist and co-founder of the startup CoA, the Gym for Mental Health. And so she actually works under this kind of emotional fitness umbrella. She is one of the pioneers of this notion. She conducted a study that came up with the 7 traits of emotional fitness. And so we're going to break these down for you today because this is going to give you some really tangible things that you can focus on in order to help improve your emotional fitness as a whole. And so the study that she did, she took 100 psychologists and entrepreneurs and asked them this question. How would you know if you were sitting across the table from an emotionally healthy leader or an emotionally healthy person? And ask them to break down what traits and behaviors this person could exhibit in order to show the other people that they are an emotionally healthy person and an emotionally healthy leader. And from the answers that these people gave, she was able to piece together 7 common things that emotionally healthy people work on a regular basis and coined these the 7 traits of emotional fitness. So the 7 things that emotionally healthy people work on constantly: self-awareness, mindfulness, empathy, curiosity, play, resilience, and communication. These were all things that people who were deemed emotionally healthy are practicing on a regular basis. They are constantly working to improve these traits and finding ways to implement that practice into their day-to-day routine. So these are some things I want you to keep in mind as we kind of dive into this emotional fitness umbrella. These 7 things are some of the most heavy hitting key elements that we can focus on and work on in order to improve our emotional fitness as a whole. All right. So now I'm going to get into the second pillar of part 1. And the second pillar of part 1 is training your inner voice. There is no more important conversation that you are ever going to have during your life than the conversations that you're going to have with yourself. That inner dialogue has so much influence on how you feel day to day, how your perception of your life is, and what your actions towards other people are. So in this section, I'm going to be talking about some of the information that was shared by Ethan Kross during his TED Talk on your inner voice. Ethan Kross is an American experimental psychologist, neuroscientist, writer who specializes in emotional regulation. And he talked about strategies to train your inner voice and why this is such an important relationship for you to have with yourself. Ethan said during his TED Talk that we spend between 1/2 and 1/3 of our lives not actually engaged in the present. So 1/2 to 1/3 of our lives, we are not actually engaged with what is going on right in front of us, what is happening in the present moment. We are off somewhere else. We are in our own heads, thinking about the future, ruminating about the past. 1/2 to 1/3. That is a huge, huge portion of your life that you are spending up in your head, deep in thought about other topics. And the thing that is kind of driving those thought processes and driving where your mind is going during that time is your inner dialogue, is the way that you are communicating with yourself. It is going to have a heavy influence on what that portion of your life looks like and how that portion of your life is influencing the actions that you are actually taking in the present moment. We use our inner dialogue for so many things. It is not just responsible for, nonsense talk, which it can be. It goes on and kind of runs on loop and brings up a million thoughts throughout the day, and it can be responsible for tearing you down. It can be responsible for lifting you up. It can be responsible for a whole lot of nonsense, but it does actually have some practical applications. We use our inner dialogue for things like short-term memory. So if you are going to the grocery store and you don't have a list that you've written down and you're trying to remember the things that you need to buy, your inner dialogue is running in the background saying, I need to get this, this, and this, and kind of keeps repeating that in order to keep it in your short-term memory. We also use our inner dialogue to rehearse and plan. So if we have something coming up, like a presentation or a job interview, you will use your inner dialogue to help plan out what you want that to look like, to plan out your talking points, to prepare yourself for that situation ahead of time so that you're going into it feeling prepared. That's your inner dialogue kind of running in the background, preparing this for you. We also use our inner dialogue to control and motivate ourselves. Ethan Kross again used the example that when he was standing backstage before coming out for his TED Talk, he was talking to himself and saying things like, deep breath, you got this, you're going to do great. Only 45 minutes and then it's over. And so that inner dialogue is kind of giving him that script of motivation to help build himself up and help prepare him for what he's about to do. And so the first thing I want to mention, as it relates to managing your inner dialogue and understanding it and working with it in a more productive way, is there are going to be so many thoughts that come up in your head. There are going to be so many things that your inner dialogue is going to say to you, good or bad. And I think sometimes where we get tripped up is when negative things come up and, self-deprecating thoughts or anxiety-driven thoughts. We can sometimes get stuck in those thoughts and take them on as our identity and take those on as fact and as truth. And we base our actions in the outward world based on those inner discussions. But there's so many thoughts coming up in your inner dialogue. There is so much running in your brain. And we don't always have control over what comes up in our inner dialogue, but we have control over what we do with it and how we accept that information on, whether as fact or as just as a passing thought. And a way that I've heard in the past to think about this that I really liked was to think of all your thoughts as passing clouds. Each one is just kind of passing through. They can pop up. They can be, light and fluffy clouds. They can be dark storm clouds. But they'll pass through. You don't have to grab every single cloud and take that on as your identity. You are not the cloud. You are the sky. Your thoughts are just passing through. So Don't grasp on to every single thing that passes through your inner dialogue and attach it to your identity and make that your whole thing and use that as the driver for your actions. If it is something that is going to impact you in a negative way, not every thought is fact. Sometimes they just pop up. Treat them like a passing cloud. Again, training your inner voice is just like training muscles in the gym, just like everything else we're talking about in this series. You can work on improving your inner voice to have it focus more on the things that you want it to focus on and to have it show up with a perspective that is going to be more beneficial for you. Your brain will listen to the feedback that you give it and will seek out things to help support the reality that you are trying to create. Something that gets talked about quite a bit under this umbrella is your brain's reticular activating system. Your reticular activating system is a network of neurons in the brainstem that is responsible for several different things, including regulating arousal, wakefulness, and your sleep-wake cycle. On top of these functions, your reticular activating system also acts as the filter for sensory input, which means it is going to decide what information gets to your cortex and what information is going to play a role in directing your attention. Because there are millions and millions of stimuli going on around us all the time. There is so much going on in our outside world. And if our brain didn't filter some of that out and allowed every single stimuli, every single piece of information to actually reach our awareness, I think our heads would explode. That is too much information to take in. And so in order to regulate this, your brain filters out quite a bit of stuff, and it only lets in the things that it deems to be important. And so you can help shift your kind of inner dialogue and inner focus to help bring through more of the information and more of the outside stimuli that you want to have. And so you slowly shifting your inner dialogue to one that supports you and one that lifts you up and one that makes you feel like you are capable of taking on challenges and one that makes you feel like you are resilient, like you're strong, like you are going to achieve the things that you want to achieve. If that is the inner dialogue that you focus on and the inner dialogue that you try to have on repeat and try to override over some of the negative thoughts, your brain is going to take that on and say, okay, this is the important thing. This is what I need to focus on. And so your reticular activating system is going to start filtering through more and more information to support that narrative. If you start telling yourself that you are a strong and capable person, even if you don't necessarily feel that in the moment, your brain will start looking for proof that that is true, and it will start filtering through more and more things to help support that narrative, which will make that inner dialogue feel more and more true. And so this is something that you can work on over time. And it goes both ways. If you have that inner dialogue that you are a failure and that you fuck up everything that you take on, your brain says, okay, that must be fact. Let me filter through information to help support that narrative. And so you are bombarded with more and more information to show you that you are a failure and a fuck up, because that's the narrative that you have told your brain is important. And so if there is something negative that happens, if you do mess something up, that one instance is going to stick out so much more in your mind than any of the good things that you've done, because you've told your brain that's the focus, that's the important thing, that's what it needs to focus on. But if you tell it to focus on the good and tell it to focus on the examples of why you're doing well and why you're capable of taking on challenges and why you're growing as a person, all of the things that you do, big or small, to support that narrative are going to stand out so much more in your brain than the negative. I'll give you an example of how this works, because there's a lot of ways that this pops up in our day-to-day life that I think we can all relate to. So a very common example that is given as it relates to the reticular activating system is the example of a new car. So I want you to think of a time if you have ever purchased a new vehicle and you have known leading up to that purchase what make and model and color of the vehicle you want. And before you ever started thinking about this, let's say you want to get a red Jeep. And before you ever started thinking about this, you probably didn't see a whole lot of red Jeeps on the road. It seems like no one has that kind of car. You're seeing every other kind of car. It's not really sticking out too much in your whole day-to-day experience. But once you decide that you want a red Jeep and you start shopping around for a red Jeep, suddenly it feels like you start seeing red Jeeps all over the place. It feels like everybody in town has suddenly bought the same car that you want. But that's not the case. More people didn't start buying red Jeeps. It's just that your brain has understood that that is an important thing that it needs to focus on. And so suddenly, every red Jeep that crosses your path, your brain says, oh, this is important. This is what we're trying to focus on right now. Let me bring this through to my awareness. Let me bring this through. And so you start getting all of the red Jeeps coming to your awareness more so than you would otherwise. And we can see this for other examples. Let's say you are someone who doesn't have a romantic partner, but you are in a place in your life where you really want one. And suddenly it seems like you're seeing happy couples all over the place. Or if you are someone who has decided that you want to have kids and suddenly you are seeing babies all over the place. More people didn't start having babies. It's just that your brain has decided that that is something important that it needs to focus on, and suddenly you're bombarded with every baby in your vicinity. So you see with these examples, this is something that you can actually intentionally build. You can intentionally choose what things you want your brain to focus on and can start to construct narratives that will build you up and make you feel good and help propel you towards accomplishing the things that you want to accomplish. And your brain will help support you in that. Again, just with anything else under this umbrella, it's going to take practice. It's going to take you repeatedly trying to implement that narrative and think about these things because, of course, negative thoughts are going to come up. You are not going to wake up one morning and decide that you want to have really great, positive, supportive, motivational self-talk, and suddenly that's just going to shift in 24 hours. That's not how it works. It takes practice. It takes repeated practice to help build that muscle. Something else under this umbrella that we can do to help improve our inner dialogue is something that Ethan Kross talked about again in his TED Talk. And he talks about something called distant self-talk. And what this is giving yourself advice as if you're giving advice to somebody else. So instead of talking to yourself like you're talking to yourself, talk to yourself in the third person as if you're giving advice to somebody else. The reason for this is because we are notoriously better at giving advice to other people than we are at taking advice from someone else. And so if we start to use our inner dialogue to give ourselves advice in the third person as if we're talking to someone else, it creates this situation where we are able to think much more logically about the situation and come up with much more constructive advice because we're framing it in a way as if we're giving it to someone else, as if we're telling a friend or a family member that this is what they need to do. This kind of notion that we give advice better than we receive it actually has a name. So this is something called the Solomon Paradox, and this was named after the Bible's King Solomon, who was famous for being able to give great advice to other people, but struggling immensely when it came to his own life. He was much better at giving the advice to other people than he actually was at taking it on for himself. And we all have an element of this. I'm sure we can all think to a time where we have sat down and we've given a friend really great advice and we've thought through their situation really logically. But when it comes to tackling our own problems, we kind of get stuck spinning our wheels in the mud and it's not as easy for us to work through a solution. And so this strategy of talking to yourself as if you're giving advice to someone else is just going to allow you to work through problems in a much more productive way. All right, now I'm going to move on to the third pillar of foundations, and that is emotional awareness 101. Something that separates us from other species in the animal kingdom, other mammals underneath us. Something that separates us from them is our ability to deeply feel a vast array of emotions. Not only that, but we also have the ability to feel emotions based on imaginary scenarios. We feel emotions not just based on what is happening in our present moment, but we have the ability to go up into our heads and think about things that have happened in the past or imagine things that could happen in the future. And these thoughts that we're having actually elicit an emotional response in the present. We are capable of feeling emotions based on these scenarios, imaginary or not. So when you compare human beings to, everyone else in the animal kingdom, we have such a deep, vast array of emotions that we are capable of feeling on a regular basis. And one of the challenges that can come with that is being able to actually identify what it is that you're feeling and dig down to the root cause of why. Because we are so complex in the way that we think and operate day to day. There is so much hidden programming and hidden dialogues going on in the background that we may not even be aware of that is driving the emotions that we feel day to day. So things that you picked up as a child, ways of managing your emotions that maybe you learned from your parents or learned from friends growing up, or trauma that you experienced. All of this is going to have an impact on what emotions show up for you when and why. And having a deeper understanding of exactly what it is you're feeling and where that feeling came from, what triggered that thought pattern in the first place, just having that awareness on those things is going to make it much easier for you to tackle it in a productive way and not let your emotions get the best of you. Because I think we can all relate to scenarios where we've gotten triggered by something and our emotions just take over and they really do get the best of us, and our ability to show up in the way that we actually want to show up ends up being hindered by the fact that we are so stuck in this soup of our own emotions that we can't figure out what we need to do. So when we have that understanding of what is going on, it's a lot easier to start taking steps to improve it and start taking steps to manage it. And one of the really great things about this is that this is one aspect of your mental well-being that has a really huge ripple effect. If you put in the work to improve your emotional awareness and have a deeper understanding of the feelings that you're feeling and why you're feeling them in the first place, you are better equipped to help other people do the same. So whether you are in a position of power, let's say you were a parent or you're a manager of a company, if you have more emotional awareness for yourself, it is going to be a lot easier for you to help articulate the feelings of other people and understand the emotions of other people, and you are going to be much more equipped to help them work through those challenges as well. And so you taking steps to improve this doesn't just help you, it actually ripples out to the people around you as well, because it's going to determine your day-to-day actions. And again, I'm gonna say this a million times in the podcast. You're gonna get sick of me saying this over this series. This is something that can be built. This is something that takes continuous practice and continuous work to improve on, just like building muscle in the gym, just like everything else in this series. The problem is now most people are not aware of even what emotions they're feeling in the current moment, and they're certainly not always aware of why they're feeling those things. Sometimes it can be really hard to take it back to the actual root cause and understand what hidden programming is going on in the back of our head to determine the things that we're feeling now. It can be really hard to translate that into your actions in the present day-to-day moment because we're so consumed with everything else. We're so consumed with our own thoughts. We're so consumed with the emotions that are going on. Taking it back to what Ethan Kross said, we spend 1/2 to 1/3 of our lives not fully present in the moment because we are so stuck in our heads thinking about other stuff. And that kind of hidden programming, similar to our inner dialogue that we talked about, all of that stuff that is kind of running in the background and determining what kind of thoughts are popping up for you is determining what that 1/2 to 1/3 of your life is looking like. And it has an impact beyond that in this particular instance as well, because your emotional awareness is going to dictate how you're acting outwardly to everyone else around you. So outside of that 1/2 to 1/3 that you're spending up in your head, the remaining 1/2 to 2/3 of your actual life that you are present and in the moment, how you show up is going to be heavily determined by the emotions that you're feeling and your ability to be aware of them and regulate them and act accordingly. There was a quote that I heard on this topic that Rob Dial said that I really liked, and he said, "When you're in the jar, you can't read the label." And what this means is that when you are in the thick of going through really intense emotions about something, when you are in the thick of having one of your hidden programs start running on autopilot because of something that has triggered you, it's really difficult for you to stop and look at that objectively and understand what is going on. And so this is something that is going to be so beneficial for you to practice outside of things that are triggering you and outside of things that elicit a really emotional response. Taking the time when things are calm and easy to dig a little deeper and ask yourself those kind of deeper questions about what it is that you're feeling and where exactly you've picked up certain emotions and certain thought patterns throughout your life is going to better equip you to manage it when something does happen. Going back to the other quote that Dr. Anhalt said, don't wait for there to be a crisis to seek mental health support. This is something we can practice before things start to go wrong. You were not born with the behavior patterns that you have. You were not born with the emotional patterns that you have. These are things that you have learned throughout your life. based on experiences that you have had. So if there is an emotion pattern, if there's a thought pattern that is coming up frequently for you, let's say you're someone with a really short temper. Let's say there's certain things that happen that just flip you off in some sort of way, and your ability to regulate your anger and your emotions is just really, really difficult. And you find yourself snapping at people and exploding emotionally in ways that you don't really want to. Take the time to sit down and start thinking back to what your experience was like growing up. Did you know somebody who snapped in a similar way? Did you have a parent who had a really short fuse? This is a pattern of behavior that you have learned from somebody else. Where exactly did you pick it up? And it doesn't mean that you have to go and fix this pattern right away, but just taking the time to work backwards and try and understand where exactly it came from is going to make it a lot easier for you to tackle it going forward. So those are the 3 steps I want you to take for emotional awareness. Reflect on negative behavior, name your feelings, and look for a root cause. And something that you can do under this umbrella that may seem like a really silly intervention, but it's actually very helpful, is looking up a list of emotions. Find a very detailed list of all of the emotions that we are capable of feeling. And I that sounds like a little bit of a silly exercise, but it's actually very beneficial because we feel such a vast array of emotions. There are so many of them that you've maybe never even put names to. So I'll give you an example of this. You could be feeling emotions such as lonely, tired, frustrated, rejected, miserable, apathetic, crushed, guilty, depressed, or hurt. But if you don't have the words to describe that and you don't have the actual language to express what you're feeling, all of these emotions can get put under the sad umbrella, and you generalize that you're feeling sad without actually identifying on a deeper level what exactly the emotions you're feeling are, which can make it really hard to address them. So I would actually recommend reading through a list, and you can just Google emotions list for adults. It will give you a whole breakdown of various emotions that you are capable of feeling. It will give you the opportunity to put better words to the things that you are feeling. Because when you put the proper language to the experience that you are having, it adds to that awareness and that understanding piece and makes it way easier for us to take it on and start looking for practical solutions. Okay, so that's what I have for you today. That is part 1 of our emotional fitness series. Stay tuned next week where we get into part 2, strength training for your mind. In that episode, we are going to be covering building resilience, stress training, and how to build and flex your confidence muscle. All right, I will see you next week. Hey, thanks for listening to the show. If you like the episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review, or share the show with a friend. Your support helps this show reach even more incredible people just like you. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time at the Mindset Gym.